Welcome to our special summer series where we share teacher pivoting stories. If you're enjoying these pivot stories, there's an entire chapter in my book, Smart Teacher, Teacher Career and Retirement Planning, where you can read more teacher pivot stories. It's available on Amazon. Now let's meet our final guest in our special summer series of teachers pivoting to other careers.
I noticed how much more gratitude played a role in the corporate world, which maybe, I don't know if that's a trend. I can't speak to it as being a trend, but the degree to which I was thanked constantly for just doing my job. And then there was just such a thanking specifically, not just like, thanks for doing that, which we do all the time, but like really heartfelt gratitude.
After 23 years in the public system in Saskatchewan, Dean pivoted to the corporate world. He shares his pivot story in this week's episode. Here we go. Welcome to 85 After School. I'm your host, Nicole, and this is the podcast about teacher career and retirement planning through real-life stories of those who live it. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Dean to the show. He is a teacher who has pivoted to the corporate world and is now a senior partnership consultant with Advanced Learning Partnership. Welcome, Dean, to the show.
Thank you for having me, Nicole.
And I wonder how you became a teacher to begin with.
Yeah, I kind of fell into it. It was never on my radar of anything I wanted to do. I was a kid who did pretty well in school, but I didn't really like school. I didn't hate school, but I didn't like school. It was just like something that I did. So it wasn't never anything that was on my radar. It wasn't until after I got married, which I got married very young. I was 20 when I got married and my wife was 19. So kind of old school in that respect. But both my wife and I had different plans. And my plan was to be a journalist.
Okay.
So I started in college at the University of Saskatchewan to do that. And then, after a couple of years of just, an arts degree and thinking about a career in journalism, kind of struck me that that career may not be for me, because in order to kind of advance in that career, you have to be moving around a lot. And I didn't know if that was what I wanted to do. And in the meantime, I always sort of had a love for, especially young kids, like preschool kids. Like that was just sort of my vibe. I had little nephews at the time, and like that was kind of just all I wanted to hang around. And then somebody just said to me at some point, like, you'd be really good with kids. Like you'd be really good. And with sort of job markets as they were at that time, people said like, there's just not a lot of educators in early elementary school. So male educators in early elementary. So you would have a leg up on everybody. So all of that to say like, yeah. And my wife comes from a family, her father's was a teacher. And then she at that point decided that's what she wanted to do. So it sounded like, well, maybe we should just both be teachers. So that's what we did. That's how I kind of started.
And for a self-declared kid who didn't necessarily love school or hate school, whatever it may be, and then finding your skill path to be good with kids and little kids and want to be surrounded by them, how did your career path unfold?
Well, yeah. So my first 7 years was teaching first grade and really enjoyed it. But I also, and then at that, we had already started having kids so I thought, well, maybe, a little bit older kids would be a little less energy in it's not easier, but just different energies. And so I, started teaching, like fourth grade and like sixth grade. So that kind of thing, and kind of just evolving in that regard, and always kind of just like the change of, all right, these kids are a little more independent, a little less, there were problems of its own or challenges, but just different challenges. Yeah. And so that's that kind of my classroom experience kind of evolved. And then at the same time, this is, getting into the late 90s, technology became more, just started coming into schools in different ways, computers and cameras and those kind of things. People didn't really know what to do with them, but this was interesting. And I was curious. I didn't grow up with a lot of technology, but I thought, well, this is really interesting. So I started playing with that, just exploring that with my students and myself. And that just led to some opportunities and just a realization that, I can sort of support adults too. So I started doing some professional learning within my own school, and then the district more broadly. A couple of opportunities sort of came my way to present, conferences and different things. And so that sort of transitioned myself out of the classroom to working at the board office, central office as a, technology lead, consultant, coordinator, and so forth, which I did for another 9 years of my career.
Well, that's amazing. And this was all in the province of Saskatchewan, correct?
Yeah, I finished my last exam as a university student in Saskatoon on a Thursday. Monday, I was teaching, taking over maternity leave teaching, and have been in Moose Jaw ever since that. This is my wife's hometown. She grew up here. She went to school here. And so, yeah, all in little Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan.
Wonderful. And so mainly staying in the elementary grades, then moving into adult education and being a consultant. And then I'm assuming you got to travel to different schools to be able to do your workshops or facilitation or consulting to the teachers there.
Yeah, at first, Saskatchewan went through a period of amalgamation in the mid 2000s. And so I went from my, sort of urbanish, which is Moose Jaw is urban, locally. So there wasn't, just traveling to different schools within the city. But then we amalgamated with, I think, 6 or 7 other boards. So that really spread ourselves out geographically. So, starting to help those folks kind of more of those rural schools, which quite honestly at the time had not had a lot of professional learning at all, really. And so this was an opportunity to kind of help them develop a little bit. And at the same time, I was always tried to get more and more connected with other other school divisions in the area, and then provincially, and then even beyond that. So that was kind of the early stages in the mid 2000s of really sort of growing my network, if you will, that was, somewhat locally, but really beginning to get pretty global.
What a great opportunity. And I know that you spent 23 years in the public education system before your pivot. You must have a ton of memorable stories of students or interactions with colleagues that really exemplify your joy of being in the teaching profession.
Yeah, if I was smart when I first started teaching, especially first grades, I would have wrote down things because it's every day that thing. Where as a relatively new grandfather, I'm much more aware of when kids say and do these amazing things that little ones do, and so I've been obviously I capture that with my phone and with video and whatever. But at that time, just everything that they would say and do, and I have lots of stories. Some of them come to mind at different occasions. A few of them are sort of stuck with me, but. Yeah, I'm not thinking of any. There's a couple that are somewhat inappropriate for different reasons. Just because kids have kind of say things that they probably shouldn't say, and I didn't need to hear. But there's those kind of moments. But just
we learn a lot about their family life.
More than I need to. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like and I'll just share this one. When the students came to one day and said, "Well, my mom said we're not going to be having any. I won't be getting a new brother or sister because she's getting her boobs tied." Which I didn't realize that was a surgery at the time, but a little anatomy lesson.
It goes to show you, Dean, how much kids are aware of conversations that happen, even if they don't comprehend it at 6 years old.
That's right.
Yeah, I love it. So I'm wondering, in your opinion, what is the most beneficial, having spent all those decades in K-12 public education and now moving on into the corporate world? And how many years have you been in the corporate world since your pivot?
13.
13 years. So what, in your opinion, is the most beneficial, having had a solid teaching career and now moving those skills into the corporate world?
Well, yeah, my experience, plus the fact that my wife was a teacher at the time, is that I never have lost sight of how difficult the job is. And I know that teachers are very skeptical of outside consultants coming in and telling them what to do, because it's a fine line between sharing some level of expertise and making people feel like they're doing it wrong. And so I'm always just very, very mindful of that. And I fully acknowledge that a classroom teacher's job is the hardest job in education. And I deal with superintendents of education. I know everybody in the whole realm of it. And it's not to say that their jobs aren't hard. They're different hard. But in terms of really tiring and just less, the difference between the classroom teacher and say somebody at a superintendent level has slightly more autonomy and control over their plates. Now they have a lot of stuff on the go, and some of them are dealing with very, very complex challenges. So I'm not trying to diminish that. All I know is that the day-to-day grind of being a teacher is something that I never ever forget. And so I'm very, very mindful of making sure that teachers understand that I know that. And so whenever I'm supporting them, I want to kind of honor that, that part of their work. So that would be the biggest thing, is just knowing it's a really, really challenging job, getting harder all the time because of, lots of factors.
Yeah. And having walked the walk for so many decades brings, street cred, if anything, to your facilitation and mentoring that you work with clients now. I'm wondering if there's anything, although you do teaching on a different level now, is there anything you miss about teaching in the K-12 system?
Yeah, I guess I would just say those interactions with kids. I would say there's certainly a lot of things I don't miss, and I never did miss. Like the administrative part of the job is just always like having to do lots of things that were like just you have to do them, but they weren't fun. But I just think like the energy that the kids will bring, and they'll just surprise you. They'll say things to you that both are funny, but also like insightful only as a child can share that with you and just make you go, oh wow, yeah, that's something that I hadn't thought about. I'm always curious with anybody, whether it's adults or kids, who see the world differently than I do. And so I just had that opportunity when you're with 25 children every day coming from different backgrounds to share their experience and their insights that are different than mine. So that I would say that's the part I probably miss of anything. Yeah, and I would also say the other thing is I was very blessed to have really good colleagues over my time. And so in my 13 years working outside of that, it's essentially remote. I never had an office. I'm in my office that it's not the same office, but remotely working for 13 years, I travel a lot. So it's not like I'm by myself all the time, but I'm by myself a lot more than I was in school. So the energy of your colleagues and stuff is something I miss too, because I always work with really great people.
Yeah, it's a different beast when you are not, in the hallways passing somebody by during recess time and not being able to swap different stories about different students. So I wonder what was most unexpected then as you changed from K-12 to working in the corporate world.
Oh, lots of things were, I don't know. I'll share one story because I talk about this a lot. And I think it's helped shape me moving forward. I think the one thing that I was very, very surprised and struck with, and I don't, again, I've only worked for a couple of different organizations, so I can't speak broadly, but I can speak to my experience that I noticed how much more gratitude played a role in the corporate world, which maybe, I don't know if that's a trend. I can't speak to it as being a trend, but the degree to which I was thanked constantly for just doing my job. I wasn't doing anything that I thought was anything. I was like, hey, can you go help out these people with this thing? Can you do this? Sure, I go do it. And then there was just such a, thanking specifically, not just like, thanks for doing that, which we do all the time, but like really heartfelt gratitude around, hey, you really made a difference here because this is what these people said, or this is what I've noticed, whatever it was. And so that made me sort of double down on that message back to schools to saying, guys, we need to do better at this. Like, and I get it, right? We got people running in 29 different directions every day. Kids just aren't built to be super grateful and thankful. Like, you don't get a ton of that. When you do, it's like amazing when a kid says thank you, but it just doesn't happen, right? Because it's the routine of it, all of that stuff. But even as leaders, it makes such a difference when somebody is really intentional about their gratitude and makes an effort to be specific and be really thoughtful. That makes such a difference. And so that would be the biggest surprise. I wasn't expecting that. That's really kind of pushed my own thinking and transferring that back to the work that I do with schools.
It is interesting because often teachers say, if I just got a thank you, it's better than a paycheck, so to speak. So that's interesting thing that you notice that happens in the corporate world. I'm wondering, when you switched after 23 years in the public education system, did you have to take into consideration any financial planning factors as you pivoted from, because we're always happy to leave the pension behind.
Sure. No, that was a big thing, right? I mean, I had 23 years, so I could sort of see the quote unquote light at the end of the tunnel. And so I knew, now again, I worked for companies that, the pension contributions that they made weren't about half as good as what a typical teacher pension would give you. So I had to kind of try to account for that in some way, shape. And yeah, just like, ooh, that, and then, when that 30th year came, which for me was, I don't know when that was, 2020 or 2021, like I saw my colleagues at the time, they were retiring. But honestly though, it was a factor, but it was like, I may never get this opportunity again. So if I say no to this and just stick, like that may be it. And so while it was a consideration and I, tried to account for that, it wasn't enough for me to say, no, I'm not going to take that risk. So there was risks. What I did do though, for the first 2 years, I was able to get a leave of absence. So I kind of had a bit of a backup plan if that didn't go well, but I knew probably 3 months into it, I probably wasn't going to go back because it was just really a wonderful transition for me and kind of feeding into my strengths and passions more than I'd ever had before.
I know there's many listeners that are admiring you taking that risk and pivoting to another career, and obviously one that you really enjoy now and that you get a lot of fulfillment out of. There's many teachers that are thinking, I can't do this anymore. I need to live a balanced life. I need to exit. I need to pivot. So in your experience, not only in K-12, but in the corporate experience that you have, what advice would you have for those beginning, middle, or late career teachers in relation to their career planning? But if they're really thinking, I really want to take the risk, but I'm afraid to take the risk to pivot.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say that there's a couple things. I think there's one is a recognition, perhaps at some point, that either this career isn't for me or this, at some point is I'm not happy where I am. Now, if it's the early one that just says this career, I'll give you an example. My daughter got her education degree. She started, had a few sort of temporary contracts. Some of them went well, some of them didn't go well, but she just realized, I think what her realization was, which is I think a really critical piece that we don't talk enough about, is that the difference between teaching today and teaching 40 years ago, for example, or beyond, was that you could be a teacher, like an instructor and teach content, and you did that, and that was fine, because the expectation for you to support kids at an social emotional level was not the same as it is today. So today you cannot be an effective teacher unless you're investing time in caring not just about kids, but for kids. My daughter recognized that I don't have that capacity. And I mean, I thought it was a very mature decision to make that, because I think there's some teachers who just they know they can't invest what they need to invest because it is an emotionally draining job. And so I think the only way you can be an effective teacher today is if you're willing to invest that part of you. Now, so there's that, but then there's also people who get into, they're not enjoying their job because they're in a bad situation. And I would argue that in most cases, it's probably, not always, but probably just a principle that's like leadership is not leading the way they should lead. And so this is why I'm so passionate about helping schools build capacity with their leaders, because that is often the biggest difference. Like people don't care about like there's a book called The 9 Lies About Work. And one of the things is that people care about the company they work for, and they don't. They care about the team they're on. So in the context of schools, they care about the school they're at. They don't care about everything else.
Yeah.
And so if you're not in a good scenario there. So first thing I would say is, if that's how you're feeling, perhaps a change could help you. Now, maybe you've been down that path and you're saying that's still not there. So I'm really at a point where I need to leave. I can't. And I would just say, like, yes, financially is a consideration, but it's just, life is way too short to spend it. So yeah, there may be a risk involved with that. But in the end, and the other thing that I think is a really, safety net, if you will, for teaching is substitute teaching. It pays pretty well. In fact, there are people today who are choosing that as their profession. They don't want the commitment of a classroom. So they come in, they do their gig. So you always have that. And right now is a pretty good time to be a substitute teacher. There's a shortage of it. So that becomes a safety net that maybe, I don't know, it existed when I made that transition, because there were more subs at that time. And so, that I mean, it may have been there, but again, so I think I would that's kind of my short advice about that.
Yeah, and great advice. I think you really need to look at your own situation. And if you're trying to, like you said, people work harder when they know they have flow with a team and they're working towards a common goal and everyone's putting in their stake. But when you have perhaps the only factor that's making it miserable is the leadership, then don't leave it. Maybe make a change to another school, perhaps. So look at all the angles for sure. And the safety net of taking a leave of absence, perhaps, or like you said, going to supply teaching or substitute teaching are great options in that sense if you want to keep your foot in the door. And I know several teachers who have done that. They've actually stepped away from full-time contracts and are supply teaching and love the fact that they have that option. So I'm wondering, Dean, if you could go back to when you first started teaching those grade 1 6-year-old students as a male teacher, with all the knowledge you have now, would you have done anything differently in your career planning?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know that I would have done anything differently. Like, again, it doesn't say everything went smoothly, but there's nothing. I mean, again, financially, there's people that are way better at this than I am in terms of paying attention to it and investment and stuff. I'm pretty elementary phase of investing. I just sort of put it here and hope it does what it's supposed to do. So I suppose if that's a concern, just giving yourself more time to learn about that, because I'm sure if I had invested that time, I'd probably have a better, but I mean, that's like anything else. But at the same time, it's like, I have nothing to complain about as far as that goes. So I don't know that I would change a lot.
You sound very satisfied how things unroll, whether we plan it or we accidentally fall into things. With all the great work that you're doing now in supporting schools, and you travel across North America, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
Is there a story that you can share without any confidential information, of course? Is there a story you can share that ignited or reignited such energy in you that you thought, yeah, I'm right in the right place, doing the right thing?
Well, I think one of the things, because my work is everything from, okay, you can have me come in and speak at your event, conference or whatever, and those are fine. But I know that the more satisfying work is long-term work. So I think about school districts that I've gone back over a decade and develop relationships across, and just hearing people say to me things like, the impact that you've had over time has really made a difference for us. We talk about this a lot, and your influence here and there. So I think the stories that kind of reignite me is when people mention something that I did at their board, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, that's still resonating with them, that, and that I can continue to sort of learn with alongside them, I think. And I've even had a few boards that say, like, we actually just consider you just another member of our team. Like, that's just such a lovely sentiment to hear, that's how they've welcomed you in, which I hope suggests that I've, tried to fit in with their team as well. So it's not just me kind of, bringing in whatever I can bring in, but actually me trying to be listening and being a team member at times. Again, I'm not saying that's true all the time, but when that does happen, it has happened a few times, that's very, very satisfying. That's
a huge compliment to be considered part of the team when, you built relationships. Everything's about relationships in that regard, being able to build the trust, create community, and allow people to be vulnerable and ask you for support.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. That's what I hope it happens. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Dean, we've reached the part of the show where I ask our guests to provide a gem, that one piece of wisdom about career or retirement advice that you possibly have for those working hard towards that goal.
Well, this is more broad, sort of life perspective, but it's one that I, again, as I mentioned, as a newish grandfather, I think about this a lot, and I think about kind of the world we live in that has its turmoil for many that's overwhelming at times. So this is kind of, and I love it. So it's a quote by Alistair Cook, who just said, "In the best of times," I'll just read it. "In the best of times, our days are numbered anyway. So it would be a crime against nature for any generation to take the world crisis so solemnly that it put off enjoying those things for which we were designed in the first place, the opportunity to do good work, to enjoy friends, to fall in love, to hit a ball, and to bounce a baby." And that leads you to think about, take advantage of the time you live in. And as much as it's the financial challenges of job transition and things are, certainly a big thing. That just speaks to me, there's so much beauty in the world to be had. And so how do you kind of live a life that sort of acknowledges that? And that's not to the, not to acknowledge that there's challenges and problems. That's why I work. If there were no problems, I wouldn't probably need to work. But I don't want to lose sight of those, of that part of life. So that's just a little advice I always like to share, just a reminder to people.
And a true gem and needed. I think it also ties back to your conversation about gratitude and the simple things that a thank you or an earnest, authentic show of gratitude towards someone who has made a difference in your life. And sometimes it's just sitting with one another. That can be the difference. Or like you said, bouncing the baby on your lap.
The work I've been doing of late in AI is pretty daunting at times. It can be very, very overwhelming. And so part of it is part of my work is to say, for us to continue to ask what it means to be human, is really kind of driving my work. And so these things certainly all tie together.
And congratulations on being a new grandfather. I hope you get to spend plenty of time with and learn from the little one as well. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show, Dean. Thank you for sharing your story and the amazing impact that you're making on so many school districts across North America.
Well, thanks for having me, Nicole. Appreciate it.
Well, that's our show for today. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you know when new episodes are uploaded. We'd also love to hear your feedback. Leave a review or connect with us on Instagram or Facebook at 85 After School. Hey, if you're interested in being a guest, be sure to email us directly, 85afterschool@gmail.com. That's 85afterschool@gmail.com. Until the next episode, be good to yourself